Hello, this is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking you through the relationships topic of the paper 3 of AQA specification. In this video, I'm going to talk about the evolutionary explanation for partner preference, and I'm going to look at the knowledge part of this course. There's quite a lot of detail here, and I would probably recommend that you select or choose kind of how to best talk about sexual selection and human reproductive behavior. So let's have a look at the content. So what we need to understand in terms of evolution is this idea of reproductive success. So in other words, what we really need to do is to have a situation where you pass on your genes. If you do not pass on your genes, you don't become an ancestor. So in early humans, basically anyone who's able to mate was able to become somebody who is now able to have kind of offspring. So what we then look at in terms of the evolutionary explanation is that some kind of partner preference, some kind of preference means choice. Some kind of choice becomes important so that we are able to understand who is either going to be mated with, or as we see here, who is likely to be excluded from mating. Okay, so it could be that you have some trait which is attractive and therefore you are able to mate, and then there also could be the situation where there's something about you that's unattractive, therefore you don't mate, therefore you don't have reproductive success. So we find that it's these mate characteristics that become favored, and so we then can say in terms of the evolutionary model that those characteristics we see here are more frequently found in future generations. Now, not to kind of say anything about any particular characteristics, so we do find, for example, the United Kingdom has a much higher proportion of its population that has ginger hair or red hair, and so therefore we have to expect that that characteristic was favorable, so therefore there's more of that particular trait in subsequent sexual generations, and this is called sexual selection. Here's a diagram, not the best one I could find, but we see this is a classic situation here. We have Joe, who has favorable characteristics, and so therefore when he's older he's got offspring, he's able to mate. We then have his children have similar characteristics, so they are able to also mate as well. In contrast, Jim doesn't have favorable characteristics and therefore does not find a partner, so therefore he does not pass on his genes. It is as simple as that. So what can we say about sexual selection? It, as we see here, it explains why some characteristics might have come across as being disadvantaged but actually confer an advantage. So for example, if I'm trying to hide from an animal and I'm large, it means that I might find it difficult to hide or to climb a tree or to escape being part of that animal's meal. However, of course, also being large or strong or having those characteristics might mean that I'm able to defend myself, or I might be able to kind of beat other males to mate with the females. So therefore it becomes an advantage as a male to be tall and strong. In contrast, a female might not need to have these characteristics because their roles within that particular kind of situation, we're not required to be kind of the fighters or the hunter-gatherers. Okay, so we find that these characteristics provide an advantage over the competition. So in other words, if I have the characteristic, it becomes an advantage to me, and therefore I'm able to pretty much fight or win reproductive rights. Okay, so we see certain features potentially might become favorable. So, you know, if I'm a more masculine feature might come across as being kind of strong and able to to kind of attract a female. So what we do is we find that both males and females have this situation where they're looking for specific traits that help us achieve successful reproduction and survival of our genetic line. Okay, so you can see part of a comic strip here, clearly trying to be funny or trying to kind of point out that we have these different traits that we might need, and we see clearly for him, he's looking for pretty much the looks. Okay, for her, she's looking for love. So therefore, she's looking for a trait that he demonstrates to show that he loves her, and he's looking for the right type of attractiveness. And we see that that becomes part of the preference that that particular partner will have. And we see in the next topic in the course, we do actually look at physical attractiveness. We also then see that this choice is often, it says here, pretty much a product of the EEA, which is the Environment of Evolutionary Adaptiveness. Okay, so also once again, I do apologize for the rude comic here, but we see that both of them have their own particular preferences in terms of how to be successful. For her, she's looking for a particular kind of attributes that kind of help kind of suit her, and he's obviously fairly superficial and looking just for certain things. Okay, so that EEA is something which Bowlby actually wrote about. It says the environment which a given adaptation is said to have been evolved. Okay, and we find that it's part of his attachment theory as well. So pretty much as you were being nurtured within a particular environment, those particular kind of traits kind of come forward, and I suppose we have some of these stereotypes. If you live in Essex, we have the whole Towie thing, and potentially some of those aspects might come forward in terms of how you bring your child up and kind of what you allow them to do and what you don't allow them to do, what they find attractive and not. So we find that choosing a partner is all about making sure that you produce offspring. And we also have this idea that the offspring needs to be well equipped to survive. So we find something that potentially kind of works for us. Now, in order to demonstrate these types of ideas, I'm going to turn to a key study with BUS. Now, BUS can be used for evaluation, and when I do the next part of the video, we will look at evaluation. But it's kind of worth us having a look at in terms of the knowledge, because it does point out some of the few obvious things that we might want to look for in terms of long-term partners. And he looked at both males and females and kind of asked them questions about long-term partners. And as we can see, I know it's obscured a bit, we can see that there's a large sample, 10,000 people, and there's also 37 different countries or cultures. Okay, and they were asked to rate particular characteristics, and there was 18 characteristics. And of course, for example, a characteristic could be physical attractiveness. Okay, so then they had a 4-point scale. And the scale was obviously 3 is indispensable. So, I might say, physical attractiveness is a 3. And then I might look for good financial prospect. I might say 0, it's irrelevant. I'm sorry, that's sounding quite sexist there. But I'm just saying that that's how people might potentially choose. Okay. And this is what he actually ultimately found. Okay. It says here that women, more than men, desired mates who were good financial prospects. Okay? They desired men that had good financial prospects. And it said that this was translated into looking for men with particular aspects of resources. So women look for men who have resources or qualities such as ambition or industriousness that will kind of illustrate that they're going to be able to earn money and successfully be able to look after or have those resources to look after their mate. Physical attractiveness. Obviously, once again, we see that men, epic fail once again, they rated physical attractiveness as being more important than anything, or more important than women did, and of course this can be interpreted into things like we can see this through a woman's fertility and reproductive value. So, for example, if they're younger, they're able to produce babies. If they are kind of look healthy and strong and well, once again, they can produce babies. Men universally wanted mates who were younger than them. Okay, and of course, this indicated the fertility potential of potential partners. We also find that both sexes did actually want intelligence. Now, this kind of makes a lot of sense, both in terms of male and females. Like, a more intelligence might indicate things like your willingness to kind of look after children and the ability to be able to kind of, care for yourself and things like that. They also had kindness, linked to long-term relationships as well, being quite important and things like that. So yes, the men are clearly kind of superficial in a sense. They're looking for certain particular characteristics, but once again, they're kind of also looking for kindness and intelligence as well. Women kind of were looking for resources and kindness and intelligence. Now, that's the bus study, very much important one for us to use as evidence to support certain particular traits that may exist. Now, we find that Darwin obviously is going to be an important aspect of the evolutionary model. And he actually then comes to a situation where he actually names two types of sexual selection. So even though both types might not be relevant to human reproductive behavior, it was definitely worth knowing what these two particular types are. So the first type being intra-sexual selection and the other one being inter-sexual selection. So intra-sexual selection, this is perhaps the kind of the old school situation where we see kind of males fighting. I've got a very kind of rude kind of way of remembering this. Intra, A, men being a-holes. Okay, so therefore it's this idea that that men will fight for competition. Now, this doesn't happen in every particular species, but it is one of those things where the winner takes it all. The winner takes it all. So clearly not in terms of human reproductive behavior. So if we were in a canteen of both males and females, we don't see the alpha males actually fighting each other and then all the girls swooning to that one male that wins. Okay, that's not kind of what happens. Though, of course, some of this is still part or partly found in human behavior. Maybe some of that kind of alpha behavior, kind of that competition between kind of this laddish culture, which is very toxic, part of the patriarchy, which I hope that we kind of seeing is not a kind of a good evolution of humanity and certainly males, but it kind of happens. It's certainly very clear in terms of this, and the classic example here would be those rutting stags. These two stags, they grow those horns, they fight each other, potentially killing a partner or killing the person that they're fighting with in order to win access to the females. Okay, and there's a very good video that you can watch. I can't play it in terms of this because if I do upload this to YouTube, it will be kind of flagged. But I will put it on my link when I kind of upload this to your Google Classroom. But we have these buffaloes fighting for the females. They're kind of fighting for this idea that whoever's dominant kind of wins. Because if you win, you pass this on to your offspring. So you can see how that dominant male kind of passes on all the good kind of strong, powerful genes that we may have. Also, another indication why kind of males might need to be bigger and stronger in order to be dominant in this particular context. And so this is a little kind of subsection of this intersexual selection. We have something called dimorphism. Okay. So we see that these sexual selections potentially kind of change how humans evolved over time. So, for example, men growing bigger because size matters in terms of competition. Women, for example, might have breast size might be exaggerated in terms of an understanding that they can feed their babies, and kind of having that curvy shape and things like that. So larger males have an advantage. This is not an advantage for females, so therefore it doesn't kind of happen. And another reason for this that kind of Darwin and the evolutionary psychologists start kind of talking about is this thing called anisogamy, and I really can't say the word, but it's this idea that actually the human reproductive cells are different. Kind of males are optimized differently to females. We find that the male's sperm is kind of cheap and easy to come by, so to speak, and there's millions produced when they need it to happen. So therefore, kind of copulating with as many females as possible is desirable, because then they could potentially impregnate as many females. In contrast, the female ovum is kind of precious, and as such, the female doesn't have the same desire to be the one that wins. She will choose potentially who to impregnate her ovum with. So that's just explaining the minimal energy as opposed to kind of the woman left holding the baby. So this could be explained in terms of Buss's study, in terms of the idea that males males prefer youth and females prefer kind of the whole idea of resources, because it says, okay, so if I've got this precious egg inside me, then of course I want to make sure that I look after, that I choose the best partner. So we find that there are some consequences of this intrasexual selection, and aggression may well be one of them, because if I am the person who is winning the females, there's a chance that potentially I need to defend them as well. And so there's a whole section on sexual jealousy that's definitely worth kind of having a look at, and kind of see how partners' behaviors can radically change kind of due to this kind of sexual jealousy. And it kind of all comes from this intrapsychic. So even though I've said that this is not a human reproductive kind of preference, we find that some of those kind of ideas have filtered through into kind of human behavior. Now, in contrast, and probably something which is something that does happen quite significantly, is this idea of intersexual selection. So this is favored by humans. So it's not to say that there's this one or the other. As I said, intrasexual selection has aspects of asyndrome and kind of how this dimorphism kind of emerges, where men potentially behave in a particular way, females potentially behave in another way, as kind of Buss kind of showed us. But we find that if we really kind of look at this idea that women do potentially choose a sexual partner, and that's what intersexual selection is, being intelligent about sexual selection. And what we find is, in contrast to the males kind of fighting, the males have to compete to show that they are better. So there's a wonderful video here on planet Earth where this widow bird is kind of jumping to kind of prove that he is better than the other males. And then, of course, if you are better than the other males, the females then select you. Rather than the previous contrast, where if you were selected, you weren't selected, you won, and therefore you took. In this particular context now, you get selected. So we find that it's another way to view this is called an investment model. So this is linked to the whole idea of things like the ovary is kind of precious. So we kind of produce this special thing within the human body, and we need to kind of make sure we invest time and commitment into kind of raising that particular child. So it says here the consequences of making the wrong choice is much more serious for a female than it is for a male. And so therefore the intersexual selection comes into play. Now, we do need to recognize that both partners are choosy, so we're just not going to kind of select just anyone. But the truth of it is that it's kind of more of an emphasis on the females. So we find that the optimum mating strategy is for a female to select a genetically fit partner who's able and willing to provide resources. So in other words, that's kind of links into the kind of the Buss study, where we see that they look for those particular resources, and so we find that the males start competing for the female for the opportunity to mate. Okay, so it's all about mating once again. And of course the female is choosing a genetically fit specimen. So we might find that in this case height is considered attractive because it is seen as somebody who's is kind of strong and able, or it could be that it's another trait. Now, of course, if something is seen as being attractive, it keeps on being kind of passed on to successive generations. And there is actually, I want you to think about these particular videos. I don't know if you've ever watched Take Me Out. There's a very interesting millionaire episode where the last character on the last episode of one of the first seasons, they talk about, he kind of comes out, he's quite short, he's kind of not really masculine looking, but then he kind of says, look, I'm very wealthy, and I definitely recommend you have a look at that as well. So just to finish off this particular idea of kind of sexual selection and that intersexual selection in terms of females making a choice, Ronald Fisher actually came up with quite a nicely named kind of hypothesis called the sexy sons hypothesis, that ultimately females will choose a sexual partner in order to kind of pass those particular attractive attributes on to their offspring. So for example, their children will be sexy like their fathers, and the girls will kind of have the same kind of preferences for the same type of partner. I mean, you perhaps a good example of this is maybe to look at the Beckhams and kind of look like two beautiful people and kind of how they kind of pass that on to successive genes. So we find that ultimately it's this idea that females are choosing a partner that kind of gives their children an opportunity to pass their genes on. And of course it says that this increases the likelihood that successive generations of females will mate with her offspring. So there we go. We have kind of gone through the knowledge. I am aware that I'm choosing to put the camera on, so therefore I'm blocking some of the video. But you do have access to the notes. You can probably kind of see what it is that we're talking about in terms of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and that's the end of part 1. So take care. Bye.